Thank you.
System. Our difficulty is that we are almost shackled in our ability to facilitate that process because of that retributional political atmosphere, where the UN is not viewed as a moment as a vehicle for coming together, but rather as a vehicle for not settling them. It's sort of more for, I'm going to get back to you because 3 years ago you voted against me in the General Assembly, and we have this bloc politics that is making work extremely difficult from the point of view of what the UN was in the 60s and 70s, that space in which beyond national interests you could, in a sense, develop things. And it's not just the UN. Look at the World Trade Organization and the negotiations there. The Doha round is a warning sign to the world that people are beginning to question whether they have something to gain from a globally governed system, right? I mean, the South has walked away. And you can debate now, did they walk away rightly or wrongly, but what the West was putting on the table was simply not attractive enough, even for countries that have benefited from the opening up of global trade. The climate change negotiations are in a similar moment where the South may just walk away and say this is not a deal worth having. Now what are we going to do in a world that is beginning to face disruptive crises of climate change, not 300 years down the line? I mean, they're unfolding, and I tell you, we're going to produce on Wednesday a new update on the scientific opinion, which will launch in Washington, and the IPCC scenarios are basically overtaken. It's just on a different scale of time and magnitude that climate change is unfolding right now. And at the very point, and I'll end here, where we would need these institutions, these spaces, platforms where the world can come together, we're actually facing a crisis of confidence or a disillusionment. And I think the world will turn this around, and President Obama will spend 3 days this week at the United Nations. Interesting signal. The Chinese president, for the first time, coming to the General Assembly and a summit of this nature. Last point is, as Executive Director and as what we call an Under-Secretary General in the United Nations, right now the big question that is confronting me is also the institution evolution inside the UN. The program that I had was conceived in 1972, not least with American leadership in the Stockholm Conference. But it remains to this day enabled but never empowered, because whenever the environmental agenda has become more relevant, the status quo interests also try to curtail them. So it's interesting to watch in a number of countries that as climate change empowered the environmental part of government and the economy, in a number of countries immediately they took climate change away and put it with the energy portfolio. Now why is that happening? You can either say, well, because energy is a much more powerful portfolio, or if you leave it in the environmental agenda, you're giving far too much voice to a sustainability agenda, therefore take it away and put it on energy, because the trade-offs are more in the traditional way of how our system works. And I like very much what you said, I think, Phil, earlier on. How is the green agenda, when you talk about retrofitting, I wrote it down, is unifying and opportunity rich. What you describe at the level of your community is precisely what I'm trying to do with my colleagues and with the Secretary General's support at the other end of the sort of scale spectrum, which is to say, world, wake up. You've got things flying around your ears over the coming decades, and yet you have the technological, financial, and market opportunities to turn this crisis into actually something that is a development opportunity. You just have to recalibrate your public policy framework, make your markets work in the sense that social choices for tomorrow are factored into today. We're slowly leading from the future as it emerges. I haven't seen that. And I think if the United Nations can provide for environment, climate change, and sustainability the equivalent of what we have already created for the economic system, the WTO and all of these things, then I think we have for the multilateral system a massively important role emerging over the coming years. But that spark or that bridge to get from A to B, it's a a difficult journey to predict. And some people simply reduce it to, you know, we need a World Environment Organization along a World Trade Organization. Others argue that the future is going to be very simple. You're going to have the reserve banks of the world dealing with the financial capital, and you're going to have the environmental ministries alongside dealing with our natural capital, which is another vision of the future. Because property rights, you mentioned them here, is a very interesting concept, and they're also a completely artificial construct, right? Intellectual property rights, why were they created? Well, somebody just thought, how am I going to get money if I don't have anything to put as a collateral? Well, we create this whole thing that is now haunting us in all sorts of contexts called IPRs. Property rights, you know, the concept of eminent domain means the state at any point in time can tell you, sorry mate, you know, you haven't got your property under your control, I can take it away. So these are all dimensions that I think, you know, flow from that point of transformation that you allude to here. And as much as the community level is always the reference point in the reality of individual human beings, I think the other end of the spectrum I try to share a little bit sort of from where I work right now is not, you know, extragalactic, it's actually the other end of a continuum. And particularly in the United States, and that is why I wanted to be here, there is very little appreciation for that because there is a sense of domestic autonomy in the political discourse in America that I think ultimately is not going to take us much further, and that's why talking to people like yourselves is so important in your different contexts, because we have to make America part of a collective effort that is going to be different in the 21st century than the last century or the last 50 years. Thanks.
Thank you.